Stephen?
Maybe we shouldn't have a conversation. We're going to get recorded.
I'm having internet troubles. I wasn't sure I'm coming through, but sounds like I am.
Yeah. All right. Well, good. How's life at ODOT?
Okay, thank you everybody for joining. This is, for those of you who can't see me on the Zoom, my name is Taylor Campy. I'm the Community Development Director for the City of Estacada. It's so nice to see so many people in person. Thank you so much for joining, and thanks to everyone for joining on Zoom. This is the third stakeholder group meeting for the Estacada Transportation System Plan, TSP update. And for those in the room, there's water bottles over there by the hall. The bathroom is straight down the hall if you need that. If you're going to make a comment, we appreciate if you do it into the microphone so that everyone on Zoom can hear it and it's in the recording. Let's see, do I need to say anything else? I think I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to John Bosket and Amanda Deering with DKS, our consulting team.
So you want to kick off a round of introductions?
Sure. Oh, yeah, I can kick that off. I just introduced myself, Taylor Campy, Community Development Director for the City of Estacada.
Elena Turpin, Assistant City Manager for the City of Estacada.
Hi, I'm Melanie Wagner. I'm the city manager, and thank you for everybody who's here and everybody on Zoom. We have a great group today.
Good afternoon. My name is Alan Wilson. I'm city planner.
Donald DeRosa, Public Works Director.
Peggy Hartwig, representing Estacada Community Center.
Kerry Dobbs, Traffic Public Safety Committee. John Dolezal, Traffic Public Safety Committee.
Luke Spencer, co-owner of Clackamas River Outfitters and vice chair of the Tourism Development Council for Clackamas County. Paul Strobel, City Council.
Gary Workentine, infrastructure.
Denise Carey, Infrastructure.
Ryan Dunn, Infrastructure.
Tammy Beatty, DEI. Amanda Deering with DKS.
And John Bosket with DKS.
And then Tara just switched seats. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Tara from the Planning Commission.
Okay. Folks on the Zoom call, I can just call on people. Let's start with Karen Havda.
Karen Havda, Infrastructure Committee.
Thanks, Karen. Stephen Williams.
Hi, I'm Stephen Williams. I'm representing Clackamas County.
Thank you, Stephen. Avi with ODOT.
Hey, Avi Tear, Development Review Lead Engineering for ODOT Traffic.
Thanks, Avi. Grant O'Connell.
Hi, Grant O'Connell, Senior Long Range Planner at TriMet.
Thank you, Grant. And Brandon Crawford.
Hi, Brandon Crawford, planner with MIG, and I'll be joined with Matt Hasty, also with MIG, probably about an hour.
Cool. Thanks, Brandon. Kelly Reed.
Hi, everyone. Kelly Reed with the Department of Land Conservation and Development.
Thank you, Kelly. And then Lewis Kelly.
Hi, Lewis Kelly with ODOT, administering the TGM grant for this project.
Thank you, Lewis. Sarah Hibbert.
Sarah Hibbert from the library, circulation supervisor, also city staff.
Thanks, Sarah. And Brian Brightville.
Brian Brightville, city planner, City of Estacada.
All right. I think that's it.
All right, thank you. I'm assuming, do you have my PowerPoint up? Yeah. You can go on to the second slide there. So hopefully everyone saw the materials that were posted to the website and available for the meeting. You at least saw the agenda. You got that? And the rather large technical memorandum, the project alternatives memo, and the regulatory solutions memo. Those are the kind of the key parts of what we're going to cover today. I'll touch a little bit on the funding forecast there as well, but if you looked at those memoranda, you probably saw there's a ton of content to cover. We are in the thick of it now. This is more or less kind of the meat of the TSP update. So this is our first draft at pulling a lot of the comments and requests together. So it's kind of the beginning of this period where we need to get more feedback and beat that into shape over the next month or so. So go ahead and go on to the next slide. So just a reminder of where we are at in the process and kind of what we've done. As you can see, we're about midway through, a little bit more through the project, toward the end of this evaluate stage. So what we'd done in the past was, if you recall, we started off with developing the goals and objectives for the transportation system plan update. We did an assessment of the city's current, development code and policies. We looked at what are the existing needs of the transportation system. So what's maybe working well and what do people want to see fixed? And then we took that through. We've had a couple of different committee meetings. We've met with the DEI committee here at the city 3 times now, and this is our 3rd meeting with you, the stakeholder group. In addition, there have been a couple of city council briefings. We had our first round of community input at the end of that understand stage to get more feedback on what people's interests were and issues they wanted to see fixed. And we're going to discuss kind of an overview of the output or input we got from that in a couple slides here. I think that the summary document from that feedback is also on the project website if you want to dig into that a little bit more. So going forward from here, after this meeting coming up next month, is I think the city's already advertised it, May 15th, we're going to have that next community workshop to get feedback on the draft solutions. And there'll be another 3-week online open house, much like there was the first time, to give folks more opportunity to provide input if they couldn't make that. And then going forward, after we finish that public input period, as I said, we'll refine this content, package it up into the draft TSP, and that should be the next time we meet with you here. The last S here at the far right there, we should have a draft plan for you to review, and we'll get kind of the final comments on that before we head into the adoption process. So we're getting closer, but still a lot of work to do. Go ahead and go to the next there. Thank you. So the first round of community outreach, we kind of had a number of ways in addition to just the workshop that we had in this room that we attempted to reach out to the community and make them aware of the project and get some responses. There was a fact sheet that was mailed out. We have a project website, of course, and the city did a number of social media posts. I mentioned a couple of city council briefings. Of course, our stakeholder group meetings, which after today would be 3 and not 2. We met with the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee 3 times. There's also a youth discussion flyer and an activity with youth through Ant Farm. And the city staff did a number of direct stakeholder interviews, again, to just kind of reach out directly and make sure kind of folks representing different aspects of the community were getting involved. And Taylor, I don't know if you wanted to talk a little bit more about any of those things that the city did to supplement this process.
Sure. I think I would just maybe share a little bit more about the particular stakeholders that we talked with. We interviewed a business owner from the intersection of Highway 224 and River Mill, which is an intersection of concern. We talked with, as is shown on the screen, several people that experience or serve people experiencing mobility and accessibility issues. We talked with the Sandy Area Metro, a representative from the Sandy Area Metro for some transit specific input. Someone that's not listed in this 8 is we did interview a 9th person a little bit later that was a representative from a bike and trails group. And then who am I forgetting?
Valerie Renteria from the Community Center.
Oh, the community center who had great input specific to like seniors' needs. Yeah.
Okay, go ahead and go to the next slide. And just kind of a summary of some of the things that we've heard back from that. We asked about the goals and objectives of the TSP and if people thought that those seemed appropriate. By and large, they did. The one comment that was kind of not so sure, it had more to do with prioritization, kind of like, well, maybe 1 or 2 of these things seem important. I don't know about the rest of them. So no reason we can't have them all in there. So it wasn't really, didn't see a need to make any changes based on that. And then we did get a few specific comments on places like as busy and unsafe highway intersections, things like River Mill Road and Broadway and the 211, 224 intersection were mentioned, which are of course places that I think we've addressed with our draft projects. General safe routes to school related comments seem to come up quite a bit in a lot of the conversations I've noticed we have around transportation in the city. So it definitely seems like a strong community interest. So we had a number of different issues related to just access to schools come up. And then a couple additional concerns about kind of better communication around evacuation events, about where to go and how soon people should leave. And then also the land use planning comment that was really related more to just the amount of development that's been coming and the traffic associated with it. And then here's just kind of listed kind of by a mode of transportation, what were really the top things. So we asked people, we gave them kind of a sample of key issues for each mode in the survey. And the ones that got kind of the most clicks noticeably were for walking, it was definitely lack of sidewalks. So, I mean, obviously there's places in the city, mostly usually the older areas of the city where building sidewalks wasn't the standard. So there's some infill needs. Street crossings, specifically the highway, that one comes up quite a bit. And lack of street lighting, not signals, but like nighttime, making it visible type of lighting, I think were the comments. For biking, lack of separation between people biking and cars, because there aren't really many separate bike lanes. For the most part, if you're biking in the city, currently you're going to be in the street with traffic. Just few designated bike routes. The steep hills are of course an issue that make it difficult at times. And again, intersection crossings can be a challenge. Transit related, it had more to do with frequency of service. Again, the comments about getting more transportation options or access to transit for people that are in the outskirts of the city had come up. And just accessibility and safety around bus stops. I know there's certainly some bus stops, especially as you get a little bit further out of the more what I'd call urbanized area. If you go up to River Mill and Eagle Creek, I know that one's come up quite a bit. You get bus stops kind of near a ditch and there's not really a good way to get there, or when you do get there, a good place to stand. And then driving concerns, traffic through neighborhoods came up quite a bit. Various congestion related issues usually involve the highway, unsafe speeds at various locations, and again, just kind of difficult highway access was one of the key driving themes. And so as I kind of close on that section, you can ask any questions you want about the outreach, but one question I gotta have for the group is if you have any suggestions for maybe how we might pivot our approach to community outreach for the second round, based on what you've heard, to try to make sure that we're reaching everyone in the community and giving everyone an opportunity to get access to the project. Just noted some suggestions that I highlighted from our conversation with the DEI committee a couple of days ago. We did the breakdown of who the city did the specific stakeholder interviews with, just much like Taylor did. And they just mentioned sounds like of the various groups, we have some good coverage, but make sure you're targeting low income people maybe more this time. And they asked if we'd engage the school district, and definitely want to make sure that we do that. And then suggested that in addition to maybe the one workshop, having access at different places in the community might help people get to it easier. And they suggested maybe doing like a table at a What's Up Estacada event. So I'll open it up to the floor here if anyone has any questions or comments. Anyone online? Oh, go ahead.
One thing that stood out to me as I was looking through this was the bike safety concerns. Yeah, I'm someone that would like to bike more here in Estacada. It's that third bullet point down above all the other ones, the steep hills. I could probably get down to downtown, but getting back up to my house would be a bit of a challenge. But my thoughts in going through the information that you had, we had very few people that looked like comment on biking. Like maybe only 10 responders, people that talked about it. And of those, I think even a fewer amount actually biked, if I remember right. So it would be good to get input from more people that actually would bike in Estacada. I'm not sure how we would do that. And I kind of open that up to the group to see if we have any ideas on how to reach out to people that would, because it's as I look through it, it looked like there were a lot of high markings in there, important markings for biking, having bike lanes. But I don't feel like we've really reached out to the people that would be using them. Because the questions were framed like, what do you think would be a safer way for biking? And as opposed to, do you bike in Estacada?
Yeah, we'll have to give that some thought. Like you said, it can be a little tough. I don't think it surprised me too much that we didn't get responses or people saying they biked much, because anecdotally, it looks like it could be a very bikeable community, but because there aren't a lot of separate bike facilities, you're pretty much in the road wherever you go. I can see how that can be discouraging or not very attractive, but we could think of just asking the question different about, their interest in it if different facilities were provided.
I have a remark on that too. So during the active transportation plan, we did get more input from people that biked, but then we had I think it was an open house, or it was some type of meeting where we had people here, and pretty much the bicycle people were attacked. And they really felt unsafe to speak up and say anything, because after the meeting, they would come up to staff and say, I really wanted to say something, but I didn't feel comfortable, because there were so many people at that meeting saying, we don't have bicycle people, and, we don't want bicycle lanes. And so I think for this, that they might not have responded for this just because of what happened, because that was only a year and a half ago, or I don't know how long, 2 years ago. How time flies. But we did have more response. We did have more response during that process than this process for bicycle riders.
So how many kids, do we know how many kids ride their bikes to school? How many kids would ride their bikes to school if there was a safe route? And then with all the new neighborhoods, ensuring that there are safe routes for the kids to bike instead of walk. It's probably all the growth is also new. There's no way to know that, other than I see that engaging the school district more, maybe they've got data on that.
Yeah, I don't think we know that, but that sounds like a good opportunity, as you said, to engage with the school district. And maybe those are questions that we can ask.
Kelly's got her hand raised on Zoom.
Thanks. Yeah, that's exactly what I was thinking, is that these DEI committee suggestions are really great. And I think that if you do engage the school district, you might be able to, talk to some kids that bike to school or want to.
We are having a lot of low-income housing apartments going in out there on to Eagle Creek Highway, plus other areas. And there may be a lot more people who will bike once they're there because they don't have the money to buy cars. So I think we need to increase our concerns about bikers, even though they're not here yet. But we want to make sure that when they're here, they're going to have areas where they can bike in.
Comment? Yeah.
Why don't you just have a bike day? Let everybody that has a bike come out. Happy Bike Day?
We thought about doing events like that, like a bike around uptown or something and close some streets off and people could come like bike on a Sunday afternoon with their family, but might be fun to see who would do it.
Yeah, good idea.
Sarah's got her hand raised.
I do know that like for my high schooler, it's 1.5 miles. Approximately, if you live 1.5 miles, you don't get bused. So I think we should think about that in mind too, you know, that the kids that live closer are already walking or biking because they're not bused. It's like it's higher for high schoolers, but it's lower for the elementary. So they're already not being bused in like my neighborhood of Reagan Hill Estates. So I just wanted to throw that out there.
All right, thank you. Do we have one more? Go ahead.
So I just recently found out that I didn't realize, because I don't have kids school age, that they don't bus kids like within 1.5 miles from the schools. And I was thinking about that, you know, if I had, I know how people have to drive in to the city. Some people work at OHSU, some people work at, I mean, who knows where, right? They're driving, maybe leaving here at 5, 6 o'clock in the morning to get to work if they've got an early shift. Say they have a 7-year-old or an 8-year-old. And say dad, because I have friends, say dad works night shift and their kid can't get bused to school. So there is some dynamics that would be great for us to consider for these kids. Since we do live in a rural community and we're growing so fast, I know they have rules with the ODE of this 1.5 miles thing where we can't bus them, but be great for us to have a way to get these kids maybe in groups, have a parent or parents take turns walking them into school. So there's more safety, because I'm concerned as a citizen, as we grow, there's going to be people coming into our community that have never been here. And you and I both know what goes on in the world. And we need to keep our kids safe. So, and then the piece about biking, I've seen a lot of biking groups I go to church on Saturday morning and I'm driving towards Sandy, going down Curran. I pass people all the time in biking groups off and on going down that. So I know there are groups out here that bike.
All right. I'm going to move on and now I've got time I got to make up time. I can do it. All right, next slide. Thank you for the input. I will cruise through the funding forecast because there are no decisions to be made on this. This is more informational and I think it provides good perspective, hopefully. So as part of the process, we want to look at where is revenue for transportation projects come from historically in the past? What might we have if we're projecting out to the year 2043 in this case, to pay for all these great projects? I mean, you could do all kinds of fantastic things and meet all of our goals if you built every project in this TSP, but obviously there's not going to be that much money. So trying to gauge how much money, if you just relied on kind of the past revenue streams, what are we looking at? And so we don't need to make any decisions as part of the TSP for this. This is more of a conversation starter, maybe for city council following adoption of the TSP, if they wanted to choose to do anything differently. So this was just kind of a breakdown. There is a memo that may have just been posted to the website if you wanted to dig into it a little bit more. This is just kind of a breakdown of the current annual average revenue sources for transportation uses, or so it's everything from plan review fees, general fund transfers, system development charges, county vehicle registration fees, and state highway trust fund's a big one. And the system development charges, if you're not familiar with them, the thing about those is they're very restricted on how you can actually use them. They can only go towards what's called a capacity adding projects. Usually that's new streets that you need to access, new subdivisions or connect to the transportation system. So you can't use them for, say, sidewalk infill by the school. So they're very restricted. Everything else is pretty flexible in how you can use it. Go ahead and go to the next slide. And then looking at where kind of annual average expenses, all of these things are really, maybe they're different aspects, but they're all really related to just operating and maintaining what you have. Very little of this is actually goes to, the types of projects you would see in the TSP. There might be some very small ones, but probably 90+% of that is all going to just keeping things running. So go to the next slide. And so if we look at what, how that adds up over this, 20-year plus period or 20-year period, and this really assumes that nothing changes, right? So the amount of money you're getting from these sources stays constant. And I think with most of the revenue sources we showed you, they really don't adjust for inflation. They are what they are. Now, maybe they will at some point, but there's no mechanism in them that would make them automatically adjust. So if they don't, go ahead and go to the next slide. You can see that the middle row and the bottom row, they're with the general revenue coming in, because in the middle row, everything keeps getting more expensive to maintain. That never stays flat. So there would be a shortfall of about $3.7 million if nothing changed. I think, and then on the systems development charge line at the top, there would be about $9 million to spend on those capacity adding projects to support the new development. So I think kind of maybe the bottom line story there is there are SDCs available to pay for some new projects with the new development coming in. My suspicion is they're probably all going to get spent on the new minor collectors, or maybe I think it's mostly minor collectors that are needed to just connect the subdivisions up to the streets. And then probably everything else that comes in through the regular sources would just be needed to pay to keep things maintained. So go ahead and go to the next slide. So I know this, I didn't include in there things like grants, which I know the city has taken advantage of in the past to do some projects. So obviously, at the end of this memo, we just kind of threw out some different possible new revenue sources the city could consider. Grants was one of them. You could also look at increasing system development charges if it looks like the market would take that. There's things like transportation utility fees, which are usually it could be a couple of dollars in utility bills for residents. You can make it higher for businesses. There's flexibility in how you do it or how much you charge, but the only restriction on them is they have to use for transportation purposes. In most small cities I've seen that use them, it's a couple of bucks, and they might get an extra 100,000 or so that they usually end up spending on maintenance. And there's things like local fuel taxes, which again, for most small cities I've seen that have done that, adding a couple of cents per gallon. Again, it usually results in another $100,000 to $200,000 of revenue annually. My suspicion is in Estacada, you might not get as much bang for the buck out of that as in some cities like Sandy and Hood River have them, but they get a lot of tourist traffic coming through that they can benefit from. Local improvement districts and urban renewal districts, which are, I'm guessing, I know the city has an urban renewal district currently, so some of you might be familiar with that. But in both cases, you're essentially have a boundary and you can identify specific improvements to do within those boundaries. In one case, in local improvement districts, the basically the residents or businesses within that boundary pay a proportionate share of the improvements. I see they use a lot of times do sidewalk infill. And then urban renewal districts, the money is coming from incremental increases in the taxes, assuming that the property values go up when improvements are done within the boundary. And then debt financing, it's usually like bonds, which I don't think I've seen cities as small as Estacada do, but usually that's requires a voter approved tax, and in exchange they get a certain list of projects built more or less. So so there are options. The city is not required to do any of them, but if there's interest in getting a lot of the improvements in the TSP built, there are various avenues you can take to try to find funding for that. There are currently a lot of grants available. Any quick questions on that?
Well, I guess with the SDCs, I mean, $330,000 a year seems like a very small amount considering how much growth there is going on right now. And there's some connector projects on that document, and you couldn't even do one of them with what we have. And if it's 20 years at $330,000 a year, that's, unless I'm missing something, like six and a half.
The math on
million,
that
not
one's a
9
little bit
million.
tricky because SDCs are going to do this, is right. It's totally going to be dependent on how much development happened in that given
Right.
year. So the 330 was just looking at, if I look back at the last 5 years, what was the average?
Mhm.
What we did to project it forward was we looked at how much the city currently was holding on to kind of in the bank. And then we looked at approved developments that haven't had their building permits issued yet, which means they haven't paid their SDC. So that should come. And then an estimate of how much more housing and employment is still assumed to happen out by 2043. And we
Okay.
kind of did a estimate of how much more SDC revenue that could be. So it's a bit of a
At the same rates. of
at the same
SDCs right
rates,
now.
yes.
And that's what's budgeted for transportation is just one piece of the SDCs, right?
Yes, that is just the transportation SDCs.
Yeah, I mean, that stands out as something that seems crazy low to me, since we really couldn't do any of these subdivision connector projects that are necessary because there's been development, but you can't, with the SDCs we have, we couldn't do one of them. Anyway, sorry.
Definitely related. My question was, I'm assuming that all those numbers you showed were Estacada numbers, not county or anything like that. And then those numbers, and I think you answered it. It's not like a flat rate. It's based on like a per head or something like that. And so you did address the population growth. I might add though that from what I've seen of what estimates were, population growth were much faster than what they've been projecting. Where it seemed to be anyways, but it sounds like you guys are accounting for that.
Yeah, I think the amount of growth, I think we touched on it maybe in the last meeting, but it's at least consistent with your coordinated projection and with the housing needs analysis that you've done. Yeah, the conversation could be had, is it going to shoot past that? But that is what at least those numbers are based on. All right. I will move on, and I'm going to hand this over to Amanda. She'll get us started into project alternatives, and she'll go through the projects. Then I'm going to jump in the halfway through and cover the standards part.
Thank you, John. Okay, so I get to talk about the fun part, all the projects that are on the list. So just as an overview, first I'm going to talk about the process briefly for developing and evaluating these projects, and then we'll dig into all the project recommendations. Next slide. So as you know, we got lots of input on the existing needs in the community, and those were used to develop new TSP projects, in addition to input from the project team, the DEI committee, you, the stakeholder group, and what was in the old TSP. So updating from there. We had a good starting spot, and we also used the active transportation plan for all the active transportation projects. And from there, this big list, we went through and evaluated those projects in order to rank them, because as you just heard, not everything will be able to be funded. So the question is, what rises to the top of the list? What best meets our goals and meets the needs that we've been talking about? So just details on how we did that. We used those objectives that we've been talking about that fit under each goal area. And then we went through and ranked the projects on whether they met that objective, with a -1 doesn't meet, 0, no impact, or 1 meets that criteria. And then within each goal, we had different objectives. So each goal total was weighted equally throughout this process. And then based on how these projects scored, we were able to group them. So, you know, the highest scores are high priority, medium priority, and then the lowest scores are the low priority. So you'll see me commenting on that as we go through the projects, what types of projects were ranked highly based on this process, which ones are ranked lower, and why is that, so that we can start to get an idea on what we want to prioritize for the plan. So the project sections are going to be grouped into these 4 sections, and some of them have sub-bullets, as there were lots of different types of projects included. And so we'll be going over separately motor vehicle projects, safety projects, transit projects, and active transportation projects. Okay, next slide. Great. So on most of these slides, you'll see the project map on the right, which has the new projects shown and labeled with their number. There's a table in that project solutions memo that has more details on all of these projects, if you can't tell where it's pointing or what is involved. And then on the left-hand side, I'm going to go over some highlights. The motor vehicle projects are broken down into 2 categories. There's intersection improvements that happened at a specific intersection. And then there are the new streets that we've been talking about. Minor collectors on this map are dashed in yellow, and major collectors are this blue teal color. So to start talking about intersection improvements, overall, they're focused on reducing congestion at key intersections that we've mentioned before, especially at intersections that are going to receive a lot more traffic with the new growth and development coming in. So these improvements could include signals, roundabouts, new traffic control, or adding turn lanes as needed. In general, where do these rank on the list? They do tend to score low to medium overall, since they are primarily focused on adding motor vehicle capacity, which is under one of the goals, but it can also have side benefits of improving crossings for people walking or biking.
I have a question.
Yes.
Will we talk about the functional classification of streets later?
Yes, we will.
Okay. Thank you.
And I forgot to mention, I am going to pause after each like mode section of projects so we can talk about those briefly. Okay, I think I was saying that they can improve crossings for people walking and biking. So that is a benefit for the active transportation side. Next slide. So here's some specific project callouts. I mentioned 2 projects are going to relieve congestion from the new developments with either a signal or a roundabout. This TSP project list does not specify what intersection control has to be used, but we do have a recommendation that we are analyzing in this study. So that's what you see in parentheses there. So Highway 224 and River Mill Road is an intersection. Number 17, thank you. And number 18, River Mill Road and Eagle Creek Road at the center of a lot of that new development. Number 14 is a proposed roundabout at the Highway 211, 224 intersection. This has the benefit of giving a more resilient infrastructure during emergencies, because roundabouts do not have to be programmed with a special signal timing. It can handle large amounts of traffic from any direction. And it would also have all the side benefits of, improved pedestrian crossings, slowing people down as they come into town, which provides safety benefits. Additionally, I also have number 15 and 16 listed relating to if and when new development comes in. Specifically, this is going through the old mill area. Wade Street and 6th Street would need to be realigned if, number one, the major collector is built. Because today, there's one really strong pattern of traffic coming down Wade Street, going down around the corner. But in the future, that will become a T intersection or a three-legged intersection. And then if there is a new access to the highway at 6th Avenue, then that would need to be upgraded to some sort of signal control. Last one on the list, number 19, is at Main Street. So we've heard some concerns about potential for congestion and people turning off of Main Street onto the highway, whether there's enough gaps or not. And there have been several alternatives proposed here over the years, including one that looked at, closing and rerouting over to Curran Street, which involved several pretty big turns on that street. And so when weighing the pros and cons, the solution we came up with was to focus on access management and clearly striping a turn lane so that it'll be clear where the left turns can wait to turn. And then if you experience congestion for a small amount of the day, you can always go to the signal at Broadway to have a safe opportunity to turn out.
I have a question on that one.
Yes.
Sorry. I don't see anything about turning onto Main from the highway. When they did the beautification projects years ago, they took away the turn lane, the
Right.
left turn. Is that somewhere else in here or?
I think the solution is probably the same as turning left out, which is we would suggest that you turn left in from Broadway because that's where the signalized turn is.
But all the buses go out Main Street. You want all the buses to go out Broadway and come back in Broadway? School buses?
I think, well, I'm not saying where the school buses should go, but it's my understanding, I think, that we've heard that the issues with turning out on Main Street is just that during, the peak times of day, it's hard to find a gap. And so people sometimes take an unsafe gap when there maybe isn't enough time. And so the thing is, how are the school buses experiencing that during that time of day?
I'm not talking about getting onto the highway. I'm talking about getting off of the highway. There's a driveway that goes into the medical center that is right at the same spot. And when they took that turn lane away years ago, now 2 cars maybe can get there without someone sticking out on the, and yes, I've seen it backed up to go left onto Main Street many times with more than 2 cars, because then you're getting backed up into the turn lane to go left at the stoplight. It's right here. And so we aren't addressing turning anything on the highway, turning left on
Correct.
Main Street.
Correct.
Okay.
Yep. So we're not adding anything there. Really, the solution is saying, instead of doing a full blown, like blow out that intersection and redo it or put in a signal there, which would be infeasible because it's so close to the one at Broadway, right? We can't have two signals so close together. This was seen as the basically low build alternative that would still improve safety, but yeah, is not going to.
Okay.
There's probably an easier way to address it, or really expensive way. Expensive would be more like because it's so close to Broadway, right? But
Right, no,
the easier solution if you want to be to take one of the lanes and repurpose that.
right.
It was an issue that was brought up 2 years ago. Over here, it's done.
Well, the old transportation plan had a solution that, and that's one reason the city bought this property that's the parking lot now, is to have Main Street curve and go out and then you would enter the this would go away except for a right turn. And then you'd enter the highway at Curran. And that they would try to line that intersection up to make it further away from. But I don't think that's in this at all, right?
It's not.
Okay.
If you looked at it, it was that idea of the table. That was, they want to see that, I believe it was diagram.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
If you look at it, it's got a very sharp.
Right. Right. No, I didn't like it, but at least it was there to get rid of this intersection. Mm. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, true. Okay.
Okay, can you go to the next slide, please? So there's also the connectivity projects, as I mentioned before. These are adding new collector roadways to provide more access to the new neighborhoods as the area develops and also connect across the city, you know, looking east, west, and north, south. Do we have some through routes that are providing good connections? These tend to score low to medium overall. A lot of this has to do with them being new facilities, and a lot of our objectives and goals were to fix existing issues. So they are not necessarily the high scores on the list, but important nonetheless, as they do increase accessibility to resources for people, and more connectivity means there's more routes throughout town. Next slide, there we go. So I'm not going to go through all the collectors. They're very similar in purpose, numbers 1 through 13. This was adapted from where the old TSP was and then looked at where new developments have come in and where can we continue to connect to try and get a good north-south route with what exists today and also east-west routes. I would say some of these paths have slightly changed to try and match where new developments are, but for the most part should follow the intent of what was in the old TSP. Are there any questions you have about the motor vehicle projects before we move on? And if not, that's totally okay. I think we're gonna use all the time just going through these projects. So feel free to take a more detailed look at the list and let us know if you have any questions. Let's move on to the next slide. So on this map also, you may have noticed are 3 projects with an S in front of them. These are the safety projects. And I would say a lot of these projects address safety in the city, the active transportation ones, some of the intersection improvements, but these are a few that don't quite fit in the other categories. They are very focused on specific safety issues. So they don't tend to score super highly because they're not hitting all the goals across the board. But they are, S1 is to add a left turn lane, eastbound left turn lane at Northeast 6th and Cemetery Road for people making turns there. We've heard about site distance issues and people needing to turn there without getting rear-ended. S2 is towards the south on the highway, which would be the current street emergency signal. That's for the fire department to help them get out quicker and reduce delays when accessing Estacada and the surrounding area. And then the third one would be along Copeland Road to do two things. One, do a speed study to see where speeding issues are along this road, and then also to install a speed feedback sign around the curve where that pointer is showing to make drivers aware of their speed as they're heading in and out of the downtown area. Any thoughts on those safety projects? Okay. Transit. So I think we discussed this before when we talked about some of the existing issues. So Estacada can partner with the transit agencies and provide support, but generally they do not control what the transit agencies do. So these are the projects we came up with to support transit needs within the city. The first two are what I would call transit improvements. These are actual physical improvements. They include bus stop amenities, so making the stops nicer, adding shelters, a place to sit, etc. And then there are also accessibility improvements, and these are focusing on the street and the sidewalk itself. So this is something like putting in curb ramps, having a marked crossing at the transit stop to facilitate easier access. And those are things that the city can fund. So in the project list, we've identified, say, pick your top 5 locations that would need this. And that's what's been budgeted for. There aren't specific locations that we've pointed out yet, as you can determine that, when the time comes. And then the other option for transit projects is to have a couple programs that the city can help with. One would be an informational program about the park and ride locations around town, doing more advertising so that people know those exist and they can use those to better access transit services. And then the second one is a transit options program, which essentially, again, is a marketing or advertising by the city to let people know what the transit options are. Do you know what bus routes come into town and where you can pick them up? Do you know what other transit options there are, right? For instance, like the Dial-A-Ride programs, or the county program where you can order a ride that is often used by seniors or people who don't have access to a car. And just making those more well-known to make sure that we're meeting those needs. And in general, what scored highly was the transit options program and the accessibility improvements, because these are focusing on access to transit, improving your travel options, improving access for people who don't have a car. All of those goals are supported by those. So does anyone have any thoughts on the transit projects? I know we've discussed before issues with having access to transit. Any thoughts on? Yes.
Just out of curiosity, for the bus stop amenities, is this all on the city to improve, or is there a partnership with TriMet? Do we know? And then if there are improvements, does TriMet or even the Sandy, we've got the Sandy stop that comes through here also, do we have to meet certain requirements for them as well too? Is there any evaluation on the projects from those partners?
Yes, I think I do note that someone here is from TriMet probably could answer, but my 2 cents before that would be, yes, I think generally there is partnership with them, and they often have criteria. Not every bus stop needs a shelter, but usually there is, certain criteria before we implement those projects.
I'm happy to chime in. Grant O'Connell here from TriMet. Yeah, it is absolutely a partnership. Often the main challenge is space within the right-of-way that is not impinging on the pedestrian through zone or on private property. And so that's where we can really work with a city where we rely on a city help for that. And then certainly, you know, the concrete pad that they sit upon, but then the actual amenities themselves, we do maintain a portfolio of seating and shelter amenities. Now, we do deploy them commensurate with ridership. And so in some cases, where it may be desirable to have a shelter, we may not find that it warrants based on our current guidelines. But sometimes we have done creative partnerships where some sort of canopy is incorporated into a development that just looks like an architectural feature of the building. So there's lots of ways to try to do it. But if it's our shelter and bench, we do deploy those, maintain those on a weekly basis. But us deploying that is dependent upon a certain level of ridership.
Thank you.
Any other thoughts on transit?
For you. Comment has come up a couple of times and it came up in the first meeting. And it was responded to, but I just want to check with the group here. It was about.
Oh,
folks-
sorry, John, could you speak into the mic?
So yes, the question or comment was about folks who live outside of Estacada wanting better access to transit. And I believe that was responded to and that there were some services that were already available. I know the county has a transportation reaching people program that's specifically for that. So you can arrange for a ride for seniors and people with disabilities. So kind of my question to the group is, knowing that, I'm wondering, is that sufficient? Was this more of an education outreach issue? Is there still a need beyond that?
It's an issue.
Tell me more, please.
You can't get in, and the county is so booked on that they don't have the openings to transport the people. And we get calls at least 3 times a week at the center. We need rides for a medical appointment. Can you help us? So it is still an issue. It's just a lack of resources for it.
Okay, so the program is there. It's there is a capacity problem.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
I would agree. I've heard the same thing as well too. People running into that capacity issue. So the need is out there.
I need.
Okay, let's get back to the presentation then. That's 3 areas down, 1 left, which is the active transportation projects. And I've split those up into, I believe, at least 4 sub-slides. So I'm going to go over each of the types of projects on this map because there's a lot going on. And then I'll highlight a few projects and we can talk about what types of projects are most important to you. So first on this map, the street upgrades, those are in brown. And these ones you can see all over town. And they tend to be addressing a lot more than just sidewalk and bike lane. They're really filling out the cross section to how it should be built according to our standards. So if the roadway needs sidewalk, that's sidewalk infill, adding bike lanes, adding a landscape strip, bringing it up to our urban standards. And so part of how this gets paid for, new development can pay for upgrades. If their frontage of their property is along that street, they would be responsible for that. But in older neighborhoods that have already been developed, the city would be on the hook to pay for these upgrades. So based on where these lines are on the map, you can kind of envision where that might or might not apply. These projects do tend to score medium to high, our first high scoring projects, because they are providing access to all modes. They're helping people driving with safety. They're helping people walking and biking and just creating a nicer environment as you're going through town. So that's those projects. On the next slide, we'll talk about crossing improvements. So these are another point locations at intersections for people trying to cross the street, walking, biking, accessing transit. And these projects tend to include adding curb ramps, possibly adding curb extensions to shorten the crossing distance, marking crosswalks, so that's clear, adding signage, or any other enhanced crossing improvements. And these often go hand in hand with some of the Safe Routes to School projects that we'll be talking about, as crossing is a big part of safety. You know, walking along the sidewalk is great, but if you feel unsafe crossing the street, that stops you in your tracks. So those are the white circles, probably the hardest to see on this map, but there are a handful of those projects centered mostly in the downtown area and around the schools. That's where they're most commonly needed. Next slide. We'll talk about specifically the Safe Routes to School projects. These came from the Active Transportation Plan, and they're categorized in their own category because they're specifically aimed with helping the routes people use commonly to get to school. And because they're trying to facilitate walking and biking, a lot of these include things we've already talked about, like adding signage, adding sidewalks, pavement markings for people biking, crosswalks, all those classic walking and biking improvements. The key thing about Safe Routes to School projects is that they are often funded by grants. That's a great opportunity to get other funding if you can specifically target Safe Routes to School. And they definitely score medium or high. Again, they're kind of coming together of all the different types of improvements we've been talking about. Safe Routes to School really hits the nail on the head there. It improves access, it improves travel options for people, it improves safety. And those were in yellow, if I didn't mention that on this map, so you can pick them out. I think I mentioned they're obviously around the schools, but those are in yellow. And then on the next slide, we have the pink and green lines. So these are separate, either pedestrian or bike only improvements. We kept them separate from the street upgrades, so you would know they're just doing one thing. And those are doing pretty much what it sounds like. For bikes, they're either adding in bike lanes or sharrows where they would be needed on a collector roadway, for instance, and a general sidewalk infill. So if a road looks great, perfect cross section, it just doesn't have sidewalk, that's the pink line, as opposed to, or I'm sorry, that's the green line, as opposed to the street upgrades. These are mostly on existing facilities, so they would likely have to be funded by the city, not related to new development, and they score well, again, for the reasons that all of the active transportation projects do. Next slide. So this is the last category of active transportation projects. They are the dashed blue lines, which show new shared use path or trails. The dark blue lines are the existing trails, so you can see where they connect in. And the idea was to really create a system here of paths and trails to provide alternative lower stress facilities for people walking and biking. So for both travel options and for recreation purposes, people may want to walk or bike on a less stressful street. So that is what the paths and trails are for. They do tend to score lower for some of the same reasons that the new streets scored lower, which is you're building, you know, a big new path and it's going to address travel options for people walking and biking, but it's not going to fix as many existing issues or existing deficiencies. And I also put a note here for funding. There's potential to partner with the State Parks Department if you're using trails to promote tourism, perhaps along the riverfront or through your parks. That can be a good opportunity because otherwise you have a pretty big aspirational trail system. And those will definitely have to be prioritized. Okay, next, thank you. So this is the project highlights page. I have a few projects I pulled out as an example of the categories we just went through. And then I would also love to take any questions on these projects or comments on which ones strike you as the most important. So an example of a street upgrade project would be number 14 going down Eagle Creek Road and Wade Street. And the improvements needed here would be the urban upgrade, adding sidewalks, curb, bike lanes along that whole section, which would also help with accessing transit, since that's where the bus line runs and there are many stops on the side of the road there. An example of the crossing improvement project is one we heard a lot about, which was at the Highway and Broadway Street at the signal, not having enough time to cross. One of the options is to add a leading pedestrian interval, giving pedestrians a head start on crossing the street before cars can start turning. An example of a Safe Routes to School project is number 39. Sidewalk infill on Northeast 5th that goes along the school, connecting that last part to get to the school. One of the pedestrian projects, for example, I think you get the gist, but Northwest 2nd Avenue sidewalk infill, that's an area that's needed and could really double as a safe route to school, depending on how you frame it. And then a shared use path project number 62, there's along Hill Way, would connect between existing roadways through the park area near the school. Great option for a trail connection there. So those are some example projects. From that whole list, there's like 70, I think, 70 something active transportation projects. What are your thoughts on priorities for these projects? Yes, I think.
I guess I have sort of two-part question. One is just like a process question of how are we deciding among these? Are we just talking about them now and then maybe picking a few? I mean, because there's like 100 different things in here, and just how are we going to do that? And then I guess I'm wondering how street capacity and number of people served by some of these projects goes into figuring how they're ranked, because for instance, there's the number 3 on the thing, the Northeast Hillway extension between Cemetery Road. It's like a $4.5 million project to connect two big chunks of spaces where there's hundreds of houses, and that got a low priority. And then Farmstead Road, which has 8 houses on it and dead ends into private property, got it to widen that road and put in sidewalks, make it a collector, got medium priority. And that's, I mean, there's no, it dead ends at private property. There's 8 houses served, and it's already, people are just walking and biking on it because there's no traffic. So that seemed odd. And I'm just wondering, I'm sure there's other examples. I'm wondering how capacity and number of people figures into these priorities.
Yeah, that's a great point. I guess, first of all, the answer to your question about how we pick these projects, basically the evaluation was sort of a starting point. There's definitely room to be tweaking those groupings because, you know, we went through and said, did they check these boxes? And sometimes you go through that process and you realize, yeah, there's maybe one box to check for the mobility or for increasing how many people this roadway serves, and maybe other boxes checked for perhaps environmental, right? Maybe the Hillway is going through a wetland, and so that doesn't score well. So we definitely have and can provide the evaluation breakdown that we used to get here, but also a large part of it is your feedback, because at the end of the day, we can put whatever list of projects we want on the TSP. That doesn't mean they're all going to get built. You're still going to have to give input on what is important and where you want to spend the very limited dollars. So that's my initial answer with the specifics of Farmstead versus Hillway. I would have to look at the exact evaluation, but that's what I'm thinking is it probably came down to checking some of the other boxes with those goals.
So I had the same question kind of on, she was on the roads, but this is on the one that you were just talking about. For example, you have Southeast Reagan Hill Road from Bryant, which is at the very top, which is where city limits ends right now, even though it's not, and to the end of the east of UGB, so to the, where the UGB ends. And that's a high. Does the evaluation rating doesn't mean it's a high priority. It just means, what does it mean actually? Is it that it's a high
It means
priority?
basically that it ranked well on
Okay,
against those objectives.
Okay.
And so instead of giving you a bunch of numbers like 12, you're like, what does a score of 12 mean? We grouped them so you could see these ones
Okay.
ranked higher or lower.
okay, okay. So it doesn't necessarily mean that that's highest priority for the city to do. They're gonna look at these and see what, okay, gotcha.
Yeah, I just want to, go ahead, Melanie.
Well, you might be gonna speak to this, but I think some of those projects too, is not that we're gonna go out and the city's just gonna start doing these projects, but if something develops up there, that's the standard that they would develop to. Is that kind of how to look at it also, is that we might not actually construct them proactively, but if something develops, we would want that. Is that, I don't know if that's accurate or not.
Let me answer one part of this question first. Yeah, so the ranking, the high, medium, low, is, as Amanda said, it's like, if we just kind of run through and, look at the evaluation criteria, which are the goals and objectives, and of course, there's some subjectivity in that, and we just say, okay, basically that project might have checked a lot of boxes. Theoretically, that would tell you that those should be your highest priority projects. In reality, there are going to be unintended consequences if all you do is use that and ride with it. So we're very much asking you to question those priorities. If you see things that you're like, no, this doesn't make any sense, we think these should be the high priority projects. That's exactly what I want to know, because after this engagement process, we will be asking people what projects do they think are the highest value ones. We need to kind of come up and reshuffle and say, okay, this is what we think are the highest priority projects, that the community values, and hopefully align well with the goals and objectives too. Because we want to frame those up for city council, right? When it comes to implementing projects down the line. I think as Melanie was saying too, is the reality is that when you implement these projects, a lot of times it's opportunistic. It's not going to be this one first, then this one, then this one, purely by the ranking. And like with a lot of the streets, whether it's a Regan Hill or something else, a lot of times development's going to end up building those. And it kind of doesn't matter how you prioritized it. It's just going to get built with the development. City would probably spend grant funds or any other funds somewhere else.
So there's 77 projects here on
Okay.
this list.
We're starting with number one.
Yeah, so could we just like email you, these are what we think is high, and maybe just leave it at that, that maybe they're like, we might all have 10 of these that we feel like is really important and.
Yeah.
and
I think as you're digging into this stuff, the key things are obviously like, did we miss a project? Is there
Yeah.
something that we need to get in here?
And there's a
and the
couple
other
done
is-
ones.
Yeah, yeah,
So,
we need to clean those
yeah.
up too. I think we got some,
Yeah.
we may have missed some.
Mhm.
And the others, like I said, the priorities, if you could pick 5 projects, what would they be?
Okay.
What are your top ones?
Gotcha.
We've got a hand raised on Zoom.
Yeah, Beth?
Okay. Can you hear me okay?
Barely.
We can't hear you. We can't hear you that well. Can you speak up a little?
Okay, yes. I just wanted to say that I was really happy to see number 46 on there, which is adding a stop sign. It looks like both ways, the corner of 6th and Broadway by the school. I know I see a lot of cars speeding through there, probably 40 miles an hour every morning. Cars pulling out from the school, almost getting hit. There's kids I've seen almost get hit there, so I think that's a huge win, and I would assume you could probably do that one under the safe routes.
Yeah, if I heard you right, was that the all-way stop at 6th and Broadway?
Yes.
Yeah, that did come from the Safe Routes to School action planning that the city was doing concurrently with the active transportation plan. So that one's a carryover. But that is one I think to look at closely. Obviously, they're there's some trade-offs. If you do always stop, that means traffic on 6 is going to have to stop. It's a trade-off. It's not necessarily a bad thing. It would be a good traffic calming measure, especially on a route that I think is pretty important for safe routes to school. And I think also we're finding, and man, you can correct me if I'm wrong, there's a table at the kind of the end of the motor vehicle section that compares some of the, the major intersections in town and how much congestion they're experiencing before all these projects and how much after. And I think that intersection was one, if you leave it as a two-way stop, something had to be done in the future because it was going to take you a really long time to turn off a Broadway. And there's not enough traffic to warrant doing a traffic signal or anything like that. Doing an all-way stop kind of balances that delay a bit, does incur more delay on 6th, but then also balances it out, makes it a lot easier to get out from Broadway as well.
I just like to add my 2 cents about Broadway and 6th there. I live on 4th and 6th and Main. But what happens is the cars do stop there, and then they speed up to get their speed back up. And you got kids crossing there, you got people crossing there. And I really think, and the way it is now, it is backing up Broadway both ways. So I really think just a 4-way stop would be the simplest thing to do. It's going to be a little bit of time congestion, but I think it's going to pay off in the long run.
I have a question on the backfilling. I think that's what we call it, of sidewalks.
Infill, yeah.
Infill, thank you. The responsibility of those, isn't that typically property owner to do that as opposed to the city being responsible for sidewalks? Where's the balance there?
I don't know exactly, but I think it's usually the city because it would be, sidewalk is usually within the city's right of way. So the right of way of the streets the city maintains is for that whole cross section, which includes, sidewalk, landscape strip, if there is any, curb, bike lanes, and then the whole street. So as long as that's within their right of way.
I know I got a building downtown and I had to replace my sidewalk. It was getting crumbly, and that was the building owner's
Replacing
responsibility.
sidewalks are different.
Maintenance, the
Then you-
maintenance of
yeah.
the sidewalks, right? would
Yeah,
be the
You
property
can make
owner.
the property owner, it's just if they don't have a sidewalk, you
Mm-hmm.
can't make them do it unless they do improvements to their land in a certain amount of money or.
If they get a building
whatever.
permit over 25,000.
So then what we're talking here is fixing sidewalks, though. I think like second. I think
No, this is infilling. yeah,
infill. What
we're
is
talking.
infilling? then?
There's not a sidewalk there now, and we want a sidewalk there.
Okay.
It's like what we did up by the, across from the library in Wade Creek Park.
Yeah.
We put that curb in front of there. That's just the info for that safe route to school.
All right, great. Thank you.
Ready to move on to standard? Somebody wants to talk about functional classification.
Did you have a question, Carrie?
Yes, I did. On the active transportation project like we have coming on Main Street here. That's locked in. That's a done deal, right? That's a green light, the way it says.
I'm sorry, what was that?
The question on the development of Main Street, the project that's over there on the drawing.
Okay.
Anything that happens that in the transportation committee that has been addendums or things added, that thing stays the way it is, right? For proceeding with the project.
So we're talking about
We're just
different
about ready to
projects.
I'm
Yeah.
talking, yeah.
We're just about ready to kick that project off, so it would be as we've been developing it.
So the way it is now, it is official. It goes just like that, just out there.
Yeah, because
Yeah.
it would match the active transportation plan, which is what we're putting into this, so it should match up to what this says.
Mhm.
Okay, I think that's what, the feedback I get from people in town, which we got a lot of feedback on that over time, and they came in to speak with the committee, is it gonna stay like that? That's the question.
You mean it's gonna stay as the design was approved by the
the
city
design.
council?
Yeah,
Right, I think we've come to a final design and
okay, cool,
that's what we're doing.
right.
Mhm.
Yeah, there's nothing we're doing in this project or the
Okay.
TSP update to change that.
Okay.
All right, go ahead and go at least one slide forward. So standards, so a lot of stuff in here. As time permits, I will definitely go through street functional classifications and cross sections. I think those will be of most interest. Maybe we'll get into mobility standards and access spacing too, which I think will be a very quick discussion. So go ahead. Street functional classification changes. So your street functional classification, if you're not as familiar, there's a map in the current TSP, so it identifies whether streets are basically arterials, major collectors, minor collectors, or local streets. So the arterials and collectors are generally designed to carry more traffic. Usually you need separate bike facilities on those because you've got more traffic. It's, you know, as opposed to local street where it might be okay to ride in the street. So the designation of these also links to the typical cross sections that you see in the pages following this. So the design of the street is determined by its functional classification. So we did make a few changes as we were updating this. And those being Woodland Road over here from Lawrence to the west terminus will be extended to Gardner Drive extension as a minor collector. So here, that route there. Get this on. So what we were trying to do, if you look at the current functional classification map in the TSP, we're kind of trying to find the balance between making sure we have enough collectors for an east-west kind of grid so we don't overload the local streets. And I don't think we made it, as you can see, we didn't make a lot of changes to the kind of the street connectivity in the north, but there was a bit more of a gap over here. And so we added in some minor collectors in that area to kind of give a little bit of a framework there. Coupland Road from Cemetery to Lawrence, that used to be a minor collector. We just changed that to a major. So we've got kind of one consistent major collector east-west, which eventually would go all the way to the highway once that development at the old mill happens. Deuce Road was changed. I think before it was just a little piece of it was a minor collector. So now we want to actually, with that and Lawrence, should it get upgraded to an urban standard, that would all be a major collector around the outside. And then Hillway from Cemetery to the west, Cemetery in the west to the new Southeast Woodland extension. I believe that was this piece. I think that was a local street before. And we wanted to continue the minor collector route through here because, as I said, we had a gap in this area of the city where we really didn't have anything but local streets. And then Evergreen Way, I guess here's a question for the group. I think this yellow is actually supposed to be off this map now. That used to be in the current TSP, a minor collector going all the way up to River Mill. I'm not sure if you want that going through the park or if that's even viable. It looks like a pretty secure area where the dam is to get through there. I don't know if you really need that. So we were suggesting just removing that extension and leaving it as a local street access into the park. And that's as far as it'll go. Questions on functional classification? Go ahead.
Well, Evergreen Lane is owned by PGE. Even the part of the road that goes to Tulip where our shop is a PGE property. It's not a public road. So I would suggest not having that there. But then up like right above that X, the red X on the very northern part, that kind of dashed road that goes up.
Yeah.
So when the Deuce Road subdivision went in, we had this big thing where we made them put that in as a minor collector, right, Taylor? And it's not even showing up on our map that it's there. So I just wondered why, because it was a big deal because it was originally kind of it was originally to the east. But then when we looked at the topography, we thought, oh, since these big subdivisions are going in, we should move it there. So can you add that since it's being built as
I
that?
can absolutely add that. I didn't know that was supposed to be a minor collector.
Or is that Xing out saying that Cemetery Road
No.
doesn't go through?
Well, I don't
That-
know what
that's
the
all-
X, I don't know what the X is. I just use that
Oh.
to show you where
Yeah.
I'm talking about.
The X was just saying we're not going over the giant hill anymore and connecting that up,
Yeah.
but I
It
didn't
would
know that that was supposed
start
to be minor
Where
collector.
that other yellow road hits it and go north there. Yeah.
No, that's great.
And then, so when there's a minor collector, I see some connections. So sometimes the road that is there already, for example, Cascadia Ridge that connects to it eventually connects there. It probably wasn't built, I know it wasn't built to minor collector standards. So these in-between areas, then would we make them build, how do you make it connect correctly? Taylor, do you see do you know where I'm talking about here?
Can you, no.
On the map, it's on the very east side of the map. And it's that long stretch of the solid yellow that goes up kind of along the airport there. Well, that's that road, that has houses on both sides. And I'm sure it wasn't built to minor collector standards. And then this dashed part really is already done, Dawn.
Right.
That connects Cascadia Ridge
the end
to
of
the
Current
Deuce
Creek.
Road, Cascadia Ridge 6.
Off the end, of
Yes,
yeah.
all
off the
that's
end of
done.
Current Creek.
But do you think it's done to minor collector standards?
Do you remember the width? Off the top of your head?
No.
Anyway, my question is, there's a lot, that actually is done, so it should be solid right now, because it's already done. And if we go to connect like Hillway, we're connecting, it's gonna be easier, because I think Hillway and Campanella is a wider road, that was meant to be wide, so it was built to be a minor collector. But if it wasn't, would we just, that small connection part, how would we do that?
Yeah, there are some situations like that where I think a street, I think in some cases they were identified as a minor
Mhm.
collector. I don't know if they got built that way.
Mhm.
And there aren't a lot of options, right? If you give up on it, you're not going through anywhere. So
Right,
it
right.
is a tricky
Okay.
thing to discuss. I wouldn't advocate rebuilding the street.
Right.
I would think for those segments, it probably is what it is.
Okay.
And hopefully you can at least build the rest of it to the correct standard. We did try, when we get into, looking at the typical cross sections, we
Mhm.
tried to keep the right of way footprint and the designs pretty compact to be as compatible with
Mhm.
what you've been typically getting for right of way for
Mhm.
these streets to hopefully make it work as good as we can in
Right.
those tight areas. It might be a choice, if you've got a section where it was built narrower than it should be,
Mhm.
a choice of, well, through this section, we just can't do the bike lanes.
Right.
And we may
Okay.
have to do a different treatment with some,
Okay.
on-street sharrows and
Yeah.
pavement warning signs or something. I wouldn't advocate rebuilding it. I guess I would say that.
Yeah, most of the older roads that are minor collectors, like Hillway on the east of Cemetery Road, it's a 60-foot wide. Because we didn't allow anything less back when that was built, so it's still. But then my other thing was Shafford, you have as a minor collector. And we just redid all of Shafford, and it's only 34 feet wide. And so it's never gonna be a minor collector, because we just repaved the whole thing. So do you need another minor collector on that part, since you have the two major collectors feet from it?
Yeah, that's a fair question. That one already was a minor collector.
Right.
We just didn't change it.
Right.
So that's a
I think
fair
it should be
question.
changed, because it's never gonna be built to that, at least for 40 more years.
Right.
For the length of this, it would never be built to that, because they just redid it. And both intersections, the end at 6th and the end on 4th, are the most dangerous places to turn in town. So I don't think it should be a minor collector. But that's just my opinion, but they can discuss that.
We have a hand raised on Zoom. Stephen?
Hi, thank you. Hey, this has been a really interesting discussion. Pleased to see the work that you all and, the city of Estacada are putting into this transportation plan. We at the county really feel like it's never too early to start planning for an effective transportation system. And we congratulate you on the fact that you're doing the work. Couple of things that I wanted to call your attention to are that a couple of the roads that you've been discussing here, Deuce Road and Eagle Creek Road, are county roads. And even though they are within the city, under Oregon law, one of the interesting aspects is that if that you can have county-owned and maintained roads in the middle of the city, and you have a few of those. And so we would just ask that you keep that in mind. And as you're talking about changing functional classification, or you're talking about your plans for those roads going forward, if you could reach out to us and coordinate with us so that both the city and the county are able to move forward and meet their objectives for those particular roads.
Thanks, Stephen. Yeah, I was talking with, I'm gonna forget the person's name. Someone at Clackamas County.
Mike Besner?
One of the Mikes, or yeah. Or Joe Merrick, maybe. And they were saying that the county will soon be starting their TSP update. And so,
right.
yeah, there are a couple of, like, currently our current classification for Eagle Creek Road conflicts with the county's. We have it classified as a major collector and the county has it as a minor arterial. We have different right-of-way widths for it. And so as much as we can get either, get our plans on the same page, or just make sure we have some kind of agreement in place for what to do when urban development comes in on that road that is owned by the county. Yeah, we want to make sure we prioritize that coordination so that we don't have a kind of wonky looking roadway that's 80 feet wide here, and then the next property down it's 70, and then the next one it's 80 again. So, yep.
Yeah, and I think that's what we want to see as well. It certainly serves the county when communities like Estacada can begin planning and begin growing in an organized and orderly fashion, and that's really what you folks are working on. And so it's a great thing to see.
Thank you.
So changing the classifications, it really doesn't do anything for now, because we're saying we're not going to rebuild the roads or anything like that. Is it just for future planning if updates were done to these roads, like Lawrence? We had that down as changing it to a major collector from a local road. That would be a big undertaking to get that narrow road updated to something like that. We're not saying we're doing something like that now at this point. It's just saying for future development.
Right. Yeah. It's generally, I wouldn't expect for a lot of the main street improvements that the city would go and do those. Usually those happen when properties redeveloped. You get frontage improvements done and kind of happens that way. So yeah, probably most of the application is for, like I said, future use and street design. But I mean, some things could affect more near term, because with the functional classification, if you designate something as a minor collector, there's an expectation that a certain level of traffic may be using it. And a good example, unfortunately, is maybe some of these streets that weren't built to minor collector standards when they were intended to be. And I noticed there's a lot of houses right along them with driveways, right? Which typically you would not do on a minor collector. you'd want them facing to a local street. And so there could be some, conflicts of expectations for, obviously if you live on that street, you might think it's a local street, but it really wasn't. And I think in some of these cases, they weren't in the last TSP, or they currently aren't, I guess I would say. So I think those are probably the most obvious near-term potential conflicts. Let's see. How about, I'm trying to time management question here. I've got MIG folks who I'm going to give you an overview of the proposed code and policy amendments that would go along with this TSP. I'm thinking about making them start on time. And when they're done, I can come back and get into standards. And we run out of time. I have nowhere else to be tonight. I'll stay as late as you want until Taylor kicks me out. So how about Matt? Are you there?
I am here, and Brandon's here as well. I think probably Brandon's going to cover those slides for us, but yeah, we're here.
All right, Taylor, can you maybe flip forward to towards the end of the PowerPoint? There were, I think, 3 slides near the end. Just below that, right there. All right, there you go.
All right. Hey, everybody. I'm Brandon Crawford. I briefly introduced myself at the beginning. But yeah, I'm with MIG here with Matt Hasty, and we worked on some draft code amendments to help ensure that the development code is consistent with the proposed TSP updates, and also that the development code will comply with the state's rules for transportation planning, otherwise known as the transportation planning rule, which is statewide planning goal 12? No, I'm blanking on it.
12, you got it.
12, okay. That was a close one. So most of the revisions are fairly minor and we can breeze through these pretty quickly. So I'll just go through it at a fairly swift pace. So yeah, so as I mentioned, these are proposed also to improve and strengthen the city's development requirements. So as I mentioned, part of these are just ensuring consistency with the TSP updates. So there's no conflicting standards or anything like that. There are several things in the TSP that are updating multimodal objectives and policies and projects. So we reflect that in the development code. And then also just ensuring that future development is supported by planned transportation system. So yeah, we can go to the next slide. All right, so some of the key proposed changes are to just allow transportation facilities and improvements outright in every zone. So in other words, they won't have to go through any land use processes like most other development projects would have to go through. So just clarifying that there are some existing provisions that go to that effect, but this just kind of helps make that more clear in the code. We updated the traffic impact study requirements to focus more on trip generation, and we relied a lot on DKS's recommendations there, and we just kind of reflected that into the code itself. We added create an airport overlay zone. However, I don't believe that has been done yet. So that's kind of more on the to-do list side of things. That's required by the state transportation planning rule, goal 12. And you know, it's got to be consistent with federal aviation regulations. So I believe that's something that staff was going to address, but I think we will also assist with that. But that's still kind of pending.
Yeah, I'll just chime in and say that yes, we staff are working on that. We are not, this project wasn't actually scoped for the consultants to do that work, but you all are nice enough to at least check our work and provide a little bit of guidance. So thank you.
Yeah, and I think just to add really quickly, sort of the point is it's related to transportation, and it makes sense, you know, for the city to kind of take that through the adoption process at the same time we're adopting the amendments to other sections of the code related to the transportation system plan. So just kind of consolidating those into a single adoption process, and having the city get our eyes on that as you all do that. So.
And one more thing, sorry to derail, but briefly, just for anyone, in case anyone is wondering what those, what the content of that zone that we're creating is, we're basically proposing at this time to just copy the exact same definitions and regulations, even though there aren't really standards in the counties. But we're basically just proposing to copy exactly what the county has already imposed on that airport, just to meet the requirement that we have land use regulations adopted for the airport. So we're not actually proposing to change any rules that currently apply to the airport. We just need to check the box of formally adopting the ones that the county has already adopted for that same airport. So feel free to reach out if you have questions about that, but we will include an update on that in the adoption materials too, before the adoption hearings. Thanks. Sorry, Brandon.
No worries. I appreciate the elaboration. So moving along, we also added provisions just in the kind of administrative and procedural side for land use review and approval to ensure that there's notification requirements to any transportation facilities that could be affected by a proposed and approved development. So that would include the agencies that need to be notified would include ODOT, Clackamas County, TriMet, and Sandy Area Metro. And those are only for facilities that would be impacted. Doesn't have to be for any proposal. So continued, I think this is our last slide. So some of the other key changes are just including some bicycle and pedestrian requirements. So requiring pedestrian circulation standards for larger developments such as multifamily and commercial and light industrial development, and parking facility requirements. And that usually comes in the form of just ensuring that there's pedestrian connections to entrances and you know, proper walkways and stuff like that. And then also we added a provision to for the city to allow conditions of approval for transportation related improvements, which would include pedestrian and bicycle and transit facilities. So you know, the city could condition the approval of a proposed development and require that the developer or property owner provide you know, transit facilities if it's on a transit route or something like that. And then also we updated the current roadway classifications in the code just to reflect what has been updated in the TSP. And I probably don't need to focus too much on this because I think John is going to cover this and the other slides on cross-section updates. But in short, that includes a new category for neighborhood local streets, and then also just alternative classification designs, and removed the arterial classification because arterials are just the existing state highway, and that would, I believe, defer to ODOT anyway. And then also decreasing major collectors, the number of lanes and right of way and lane width, and then including bicycles or bike lanes, sidewalk and landscape strip dimensions for certain classifications. And then also updating the access spacing standards for collectors, which I believe John will also go a little bit more into that further depth. So I think that's all we have for code modifications, and open it up for questions, and Matt and I can field some of those.
Just a quick question. What does pedestrian circulation mean?
Means basically pathways within developments. So pathways, and this tends to apply to larger developments or larger parking lots or parking areas. So to make sure that pedestrians can safely travel within those larger developments or parking areas, and it's generally pathways or sidewalks.
Super, thank you.
Yep. I will also note really briefly that it's a pretty modest set of amendments. You know, the last time your TSP was updated, a similar process was undertaken, and particularly in looking at consistency with state requirements, you're in pretty good shape. There weren't a lot of things that we had to identify from that perspective. And the traffic impact study requirements are really more about making sure you've got kind of a good approach for that distinguishes between smaller projects that may have less impacts and larger projects with more impacts. And so so that came out of the TSP process, but not a ton of stuff out of the state requirements process, I'll just note.
All right. Thank you, gentlemen.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you. Thanks for moving us up there too in the agenda, John. Appreciate that.
Appreciated.
You bet. All right, Taylor, I want to slide us back out the PowerPoint. We were go a couple more major collects. Okay, typical street cross sections. Go one more. There are probably far more typical street cross sections in this TSP than I've seen in any TSP. Typically, you've got one or two pages of them, right? For your one, probably for your each functional classification. The reason there are so many is it goes back to the active transportation plan. If you go back, you'll see most of these are carryovers from that, because we identified a lot of core active transportation routes throughout the city, they were called. And on those, we had special street designs that would have been different from the typical design. So we've carried all of those forward. So in theory, if one of those was routed over a minor collector, that design would override the standard. So that is probably 85% of all the standards you see in there. Other than that, we did make a few changes to the major, minor, and local streets, with mostly the intent of, I know right now, if you look at them, they can be kind of confusing because there's ranges and options. And I think, as I understand in the past, it may have been difficult for the people implementing this to know what you should require or could require versus maybe what a developer might want to do. So our goal was to try to clarify that, but still offer some flexibility and hopefully put the city more in control clearly of how to manage that flexibility. So go ahead and go forward. So major collectors, the big changes here, again, we were really trying to hold the, keep our right-of-way footprint consistent with what you've been doing in the past, and with what it looks like your typical street right-of-ways have been, and worked within that. So on major collectors, which are your busier streets, right, that aren't the highway, we wanted to get the more separation between people biking and the higher speed, higher traffic. So increased bike lanes from 6 feet to 8 feet. That's also pretty consistent with a lot of the treatments you saw on the special designs in the active transportation plan. Landscape strips are no longer optional, so it gives a buffer for people walking from the street. Parking is not included, but it can be added at the discretion of Planning Commission. That would increase the footprint if it was appropriate to do that based on the adjacent land use. And those are really the main changes. Other parts of that are pretty consistent with what's there. And these tables that we provided to go along with the drawing give you the standard dimensions that should match the drawing. And then if you are in a constrained area, and I think in the page or two preceding where all these drawings are, we provide some examples of issues like maybe you're just in an environmentally sensitive area, or there's just a major obstacle and it's really not, economically feasible to do the exact standard. What if you needed to shave 4 feet off of it or something? We provided some alternative minimum widths for each dimension. So the city engineer can kind of determine the appropriate way maybe to narrow that down if there is a constraint. Next one is minor collectors. So currently there are 2 different standards for minor collectors based on what the projected average daily traffic is. We simplified that and just went with one, kind of combined them. So again, we increased bike lanes from 5 feet to 6 feet. 5-foot bike lanes are really narrow. Parking to get it to fit within the 60-foot right of way. If everyone agrees that is really important to do, we had to tighten up the parking from 8 feet to 7 feet. And then landscape strips are not optional. Again, we want to provide some buffer for people walking. And we had to tighten those up a little bit, about 1/2 foot from 5 feet to 4.5 feet to get everything to fit within that 60-foot footprint. And then next one, local streets. So we have 2 different standards for local streets. The basic local street, the one that I would expect you'd be building 95% of the time. Here, parking on both sides is not optional where it was before. Landscape strips are not optional. This one, it comes out to 56 feet. A little odd. If that was appropriate, we could just make it the whole 60, but so it's similar in size, but a little bit more compact than those other streets. That does mean we have 10-foot travel lane, so it's 20 feet of clear width, which should meet fire code, or does meet fire code for the clear width between the parking. And then if you go to the next one, so this one, you're required in your for the transportation planning rule to have what I call the skinny local street to minimize how much land you're using for these streets. And your current TSP has it. It's I guess built within those options, right? If you choose the right options, you've got it in there. So we have it in there. It's what I call the compact version of the local street. The big differences are we just have parking on one side of the street. It is an 8-foot parking, but we have to maintain that clear 20 feet to meet the fire code. And here the sidewalks are what I call curb tight. So there's no buffer, there's no landscape strip. So you're right there next to the street. So it's not as comfortable of a pedestrian environment. And the aim here is to give the city more clear control over when and where you think it's appropriate to build these streets. We provided some parameters in here, but I'm certainly open to hearing more about what parameters you would like to have in there and what you think are appropriate. The guidance that we put in here says that the application of this design is recommended for local streets with a projected average daily traffic volume of less than 1,000 vehicles per day. That's roughly like maybe it's just serving 10 homes. And then the application of the neighborhood local street design must be approved by Planning Commission. And just notes, the emergency service providers, including Estacada Fire District, will be consulted prior to approving the construction of neighborhood local streets. So those are the big changes to that. My understanding is this is a topic of interest, so I'd like to hear your thoughts on this. Did I understand incorrectly? What do you like about it?
I think it gives you the other ones, when the old plan makes things optional, so you're always changing up the, you know, what they can do. You're always having to review closer. These don't make it optional. So if they don't want a landscape strip, they have to show why they can do the minimum there, so. And the landscape strips, I never knew what they were for, but until you start walking a lot, when you don't have them, you're constantly going up and down on the, where people go out their driveways, and when you have them, you have a nice walking area that doesn't include so they're nice for pedestrians.
There are a
And
lot of
ones-
uses for those landscape strips. I mean, the city can put signage in those fire hydrants rather than having them in people's yards and having to worry about that.
But
Yeah, keeps
they
road
do
spray
get-
off of you when you're walking if it's raining.
They do get, I mean, are there gonna be some standards for the landscape strips? Because like in my neighborhood, they didn't go in till the sidewalk went in. So the developer develops the subdivision, and then as a house is built, that's when the sidewalk goes in. Maybe it's different now. But so everyone did different trees, and some people did plum trees. So here you walk by their house and there's plums all over they aren't eating plums, they're yucky plums. And so
Yeah, I
you're
lived in a neighborhood
walking
like
and
that.
the sidewalk's covered with these plums, and then you have people that the roots are, I mean, I think the tree is important if there's gonna be trees in there, that you're picking the right kind of tree for, because then your drain, your gutter drains, or you'll go by and you'll see one lifted up out of the ground because a tree root is.
Yeah, we wouldn't address that in the TSP, but I know like where I live, the city has a street tree program.
So
Because,
that's where that. would go.
yes, I used to have the plum tree and it was beautiful in the spring with the pink
Mhm.
blossoms. In the summer, you know, you kids would run in the house and you get purple stains all
Yeah.
over your carpet. And there's bees everywhere. But yeah, so what the city does is they have a small selection of trees that you can
Gotcha.
choose to avoid those problems, right? They learned from the past. And you know, they're looking for things like trees that hopefully the root balls aren't going to
Yeah.
push the sidewalks up, and at least you don't have, 15 different options, so the trees kind of match and things like
So we
that.
might have to update right now we have a street tree plan, but it's only for downtown. So.
Yeah, and where I live, some of the old trees were causing so many problems. The city decided to say, hey, look, within this certain time period, if you want us to replace your tree, we'll do it. We'll rip them out and we'll go put a new tree in. But so I'm sure there are many variations on that, but that is something you can do to
No, I think
address some of
these are
those
great
issues.
because they're definite. They're definite.
Yes.
And I like it from the consistency standpoint that
Mhm.
Denise is bringing up as well too. I know one concern that we hear a lot is bike lanes. We've got bike lanes listed in all of those, I think, except for the local roads. How mandatory would that be if a minor collector was going through, we put in a new one, would we need to put in bike lanes if we adopt this then? So I think from that standpoint, we'd need to make sure we know, we just get that input to know that this is what we really want, or, as a city, or get that a consensus that this is what we would really want as a city too.
But when you look at that map, it's only major collectors and minor collectors that need the bike lanes. So everything else is a local that don't, so it's
Yeah.
not that many roads really that are gonna require bike lanes.
And I think that's the kind of thing we need. to
Yeah.
have up. I like the idea.
Yeah.
I do. I just know that there can be pushback at times.
Yeah.
I think we're almost out of time, and some people might have to leave. So is there like a takeaway list? Are you going to give us a list of what we should do? Like email back the top 5 priorities of projects or things like that?
Could we take one last comment from
Yeah.
the hand raised on
Yeah.
Zoom? Kelly?
Hi, thanks. I just wanted to let you all know I'm gonna have to dip out in a minute. Apologize for that. Appreciate the great conversation. And regarding the transportation planning rule and the about reducing or minimizing the local street widths, I'm not sure that that's meant to apply to maybe the overall right of way, but maybe just the pavement widths. So it doesn't, I don't know that it necessarily is asking cities to eliminate landscape strips in their local street sections. So I can check on that for you and get back to you on that, because I wouldn't want you to adopt something that if that's not the intent of the rule. And if you do want the landscape strips, especially, and then I may have some other comments that I'll just provide via email to, I think, Taylor, but thank you.
That'd be great.
Thanks. You may very well be right about the landscape strips. That part I might have kept tight because I think I was trying to stay within a 40-foot right of way, if I remember right. So I was looking, it looked like that's what a lot of the typical right of ways were already in the city for local streets. So I was trying to keep it packed in there. All right, really quickly, I have public comment on here. Do we have any comments from the public? All right.
I'd like to make a comment.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's page 39. I believe that you have the highway out there going down to 11-foot lanes. I would suggest we keep that at 12.
All right, thanks. We did those, just a side note, the highway ones, typically we don't put those in the TSPs because ODOT has, you know, we use their standards for that. Those are carryovers from the active transportation plan. ODOT did provide some new comments in those, so we might tweak them a little bit, but I just wanted to throw that out there.
But if you remember, the person that suggested that was an ODOT person.
I do.
So she's retired now though, so we won't mention the name, but she was the one that said, let's go 11 feet on those.
All right, so yes, I wish I could have gotten through more. If you can catch me after this, if you want to talk to me more of this stuff, there's plenty more to get through. I would say, yes, the big takeaways are, please participate in our next round of public outreach. We've got our open house coming up on the 15th of May. The online open house will be up for a few weeks. Help us get people connected with this. I'd love to triple the amount of comments and even responses that we got from the last time. So we'll certainly be trying that. And then I think, like I said before, is thinking about, you know, where this is going and what our, you know, next deliverable is. I think the key things to hear from you are, you know, certainly on the project side, if there's things you have big concerns with or that we missed, and definitely priorities. If you think there are projects that we should be elevating above others, that's going to be helpful to know. So we do want to capture that in the following products going forward. Yeah, and be sure to read the strategy section, which I could not get to today. Those are kind of things that are not really projects, but the bike share might be. If you didn't catch that, there was a suggestion to consider doing a bike share program, which arguably could be a project. And don't worry, those don't pay for themselves. They're usually subsidized. Grants, other sources, public-private partnerships.
How do we get the top 10 list to someone who needs it?
Yes. So you can send any comments, questions, your top 10 list to planning@cityofestacada.org, or you can come on into City Hall or just call and ask for the planning division. Yep.
If you
Thank you.
want, if you want, because we're going to be discussing this with the infrastructure committee. So if you want it to be considered as part of the infrastructure committee's like official committee recommendations, then you can email them to me.
Okay.
Yeah. Either way is fine.
Yeah, so, and that reminds me, I'll just kind of summarize upcoming meetings about this project are the infrastructure committee is meeting on next Thursday, the 27th. And we'll we won't have the project consultants there, but some of you are on the infrastructure committee, will be reviewing the materials at that meeting. This upcoming Monday, the 24th, the city council and the traffic and public safety committee will have a joint briefing on this project at 6 to 7 p.m. That'll just be for the council and the TPSC. So you wouldn't be able to participate unless you're in one of those groups. But that's another upcoming meeting. And then I feel like there's another one. I guess it's just the open house on May 15th. So yeah, if you can get any additional comments or questions to us anytime before, May, I guess, or first week of May, that would be super helpful. Thank you. And thank you to John and Amanda and Brandon and Matt.
Yeah, thank you
And
for your
everyone for
feedback.
attending.
And yeah, again, if you wanted to ask me about anything else, I'll be here till they kick me out.
Thank you.
I will leave the Zoom call on just in case any of you Zoom folks have questions for John while he's here.
John, I have a couple questions. On page 51, well, you don't have it, but so it's the part of the mobility standards. And so it talks about, because we wanted to have some speed hump guidance and stop sign guidance. And so right now it says the city of Estacada currently uses LOS as the measure of congestion for their mobility standards, with D being the minimum acceptable to require signalization. What does that mean? Like,
Oh, that was my next slide.
oh,
Yeah, sure, go ahead.
okay.
All right, so this is mostly going to affect development review. That's
Mhm.
probably the only time you're going to see this come up if you deal with that. Okay, so currently mobility standards, if you're not familiar with those, right now the city has a mobility standard in their TSP that requires usually it's intersections. You think of your congested intersections. It requires them to operate at a level service D or better. The level service, it's like a report card. It's like level service A means there's like no delay. Really, you don't even notice it delay much until you get up to about level service D. Then there's some delay, but when you get up to E, F, it's pretty bad. At least F is pretty bad. So, and like I said, usually the only time you see this come up, it's during development review, right? So new subdivision comes in, they do their traffic impact study. They have to assess at the nearest major intersections what their impact may be, and you want to stay within that level of service. So going back to that table I talked about before, we looked about how are things going to operate at these key intersections around the city. We don't fix anything, and a lot of them I think were level service F. And then we have the column next to it that says, okay, if you do all these projects, which would be great, we show that we can get everything at level service D or better, with the exception of the all-way stop at Broadway and 6th that I mentioned. That one we got to E. So, I mean, the good news is, theoretically, if you had all the money, you can do all the projects, we can address a lot of the congestion issues and get them back to that. But what we wanted to do, kind of two things, is make sure that we have mobility standards that are achievable. And I think they are based on what we've seen with our TSP. So that's good. Two, that we want to make sure that they're in line with the community's interests and expectations, because some communities are willing to accept higher levels of congestion. Some aren't. We really didn't change them much from where you're at currently, so that should be okay. The other is we wanted to, I think they need to be a little bit more robust or complex, because I think the simple, just make it level service D worked 10 plus years ago, 15 years ago, whenever this was done. We've added a little bit of nuance this time. So for signalized intersections, it's still just level service D. So that doesn't change. We have some locations where we've said, hey, you could do a signal or roundabout for the purposes of the TSP. Either one would be fine. I think there's some locations where I think a roundabout would be better, but we can leave that for you to figure out in the future. Roundabouts don't operate quite like signals do, obviously. And just doing a blanket level service D is not really an apples to apples thing. So we came up with a separate mobility standard for a roundabout, should you build one that is more appropriate. That uses what's called, it's not a level service based, it uses a different metric called a volume to capacity ratio. It's not a report card, but basically you get if the number gets up to 1, you can't handle any more traffic and you're experiencing really bad congestion. So 9 is reasonably congested, but it's going to be all right in a roundabout. It's roughly equivalent to what we're doing at the signals. For stop signs, all-way stops or two-way stops, we increased that to level service E to allow for a little bit more congestion that matches what we can achieve at 6th and Broadway. That again was the balance of, we will at least want it to be reasonably achievable. There can be the problem with making the level service standard too low for stop signs is what do you do once you've broken it, right? If it's level service D is the standard, but now you're at E, it's not that much more delay, but there's no reasonable answer. There's a big gap between a stop sign at level service E and being anywhere near justifying doing a signal or a roundabout.
Right.
So we want to just allow for a little bit more delay in those situations. And that's, I made a note there, that's equivalent to up to 55 seconds of delay on average during the busy times if you're trying to turn out somewhere. So just kind of that compromise between not holding the standard, making it too tough that you're not going to meet it in some places, but also having a pretty reasonable level of mobility. So those are our recommendations there. I don't think too different from where you're at currently. Yeah, go ahead.
What's the determining factor on 6th and Broadway right now
What do you mean?
of putting another stop sign there?
Oh, I mean, why?
Yeah, so it's a 4-way stop.
One thing I think, as I mentioned before, back in 2018, at the same time the active transportation plan was happening, the city was also doing a focused safe routes to school action plan. And so they were looking at just safe access to the schools. And one of their recommendations, I think, really to get kids across the street and probably to calm traffic, was to do an all-way stop there. Coincidentally, when we were doing our analysis of congestion at some of the major intersections around the city, that was one where we didn't have a really good solution for it, because under two-way stop control as it is now, during the busiest times, there was going to be a lot of delay. It was going to be level service F trying to turn out onto 6th. Nowhere near justifying putting a traffic signal or anything like that in. So it's, there wasn't a viable solution other than if we did the all-way stop. We found, again, you're obviously going to get more delay on 6th, but it balances the delay such that overall you're getting a level service E. So I would say what it's doing is it's helping what is a future congestion problem trying to turn out of Broadway, but it's also helping support safe routes to school and getting kids across the street, calming traffic a bit. I think that's what you're getting from it.
So is this a favorable thing or a resisted thing? I mean, as far as something to make it go forward, or does it go forward? What's the determination to make it go forward?
I think all of that is, I think those are the questions that we're asking as we go through this public process with any of these projects, is what do people think of these things?
So public, the voice of the public needs to say what they want. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think, well, technically it is in the city's current TSP. Of course, we're updating it, so things can change right now. The reason I say that is we pulled that into the active transportation plan back in 2018, and that was actually adopted as part of the city's TSP. So, yeah, if we were to do nothing, it's in the TSP.
And then ultimately, it's a matter of prioritization and funds.
Yes.
At that point.
What would the funds be to put in stop signs and put down stop bars? I mean, it doesn't seem like, it seems like
Pretty
it'd be really easy to do if it's the right thing to do. Like if you're going west on Sixth, is there gonna be a backup to the main street? I mean, is it gonna cause a problem? I don't know how, how do you know that that's the right thing to do?
Well, you probably follow your code and go to that state book that you're supposed to use before you put a stop sign in anywhere and have an engineer say, come in and look at it and give you a
So that would be
recommendation.
what John would do. That's like you
Or
did for,
whoever your engineer is, yeah.
that would be,
So that would be a traffic study, right?
Like all stop signs are supposed to be in the city, yes.
Okay.
like the one we just had on Main.
Shafford,
That one we did not do a
you didn't
study.
do it according to the code,
We didn't
correct?
do
You
that
just
one.
put them up. Mhm.
Mm-hmm. And then
Yeah.
on, for Main and Fourth, we did a traffic study for that one. And so that would be, I mean, would that be the recommendation to do a traffic study before, if it's in the TSP, it seems like that's what's recommended, you just do it. But I don't know.
I would say, again, the TSP, we're using 20-year volumes when we're
Mhm.
doing these things. If you're gonna go out tomorrow, I would think it'd be wise to do a quick check. I mean, something like we helped you with Fourth and Shafford.
Fourth and Main.
Yes, I'm sorry, Fourth and Main. Just to make sure, because there are, like I said, in that some guidelines, some national guidelines to kind of look at and see, is this appropriate?
Mhm.
It's not terribly complicated, but it's a good check, especially if you're going to do it, near term. Get some, I think something I would rely on more than a 20-year forecast.
Okay. One recommendation I heard was to maybe just put flashing crosswalk beacons there to help pedestrians get across easier prior to a four-way stop.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's the thing with the kids. The kids aren't always out there. They got it's seasonal, and you've got season. But my wife and I sat there and watched kids run across the street when somebody's coming from Fourth to try to beat the car, to get to Big Jim's or, Granny's or whatever. So, it's the thing that you just mentioned, Melly. I think that's a viable thing. Push a button, flash, 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 stop, and it's right there. I mean, that's.
Might be a step one to the,
Yeah, I think that's a
that
great idea.
modification.
Anything that will, as soon as that you get through Fourth, that speed, that speedometer starts to go up. You go around the corner by the Shell and everybody's moving pretty quick through there. Just an observation.
Mhm.
I don't know if I'm allowed to say anything, but you're right on target with the state. You've got 3 sets out of 4 of the intersection. You've got little people and old people walking on each side of the street there. And the city of Canby, right over by their school, I think it was like 6 or 8 years ago, put in those flashing crosswalk lights, which scared the hell out of me for turning ever saw one. Now I know what they are, but like you say, if people go 40 miles an hour, there's kids walking right in front of them. I see it every day. I like those too. And it's not that every crosswalk should have one. However, it'd be a heck of a good idea if you were expensive. But you're right on target. Thank you.
Cool. Thanks everybody for staying late. Wow. Any other questions or?
I have one
Small question. I saw the sidewalk for 6 feet. If I saw it right from my angle.
On the standard drawings?
Yep. Are they 6 feet or 5 feet?
I think they're mostly 5. That
Okay,
6
that-
might have only been on the last one, the neighborhood local street.
Do you know why they bumped it to 6 feet?
I bumped it to 6 feet only on the neighborhood local street because there's no buffer, there's no landscape strip, they're
Okay.
curb tight. And I think I had a little space. I think I was working within that 40-foot right of way. And so I thought for this one, I want to increase it a little bit because they don't have any buffer.
Okay. Okay. That was the question.
To the degree 1 extra foot helps. That was the idea.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Turning off the Zoom now. Person left.